Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Batwoman, the latest episode of Supergirl, the latest episode of The Walking Dead, as well as the latest episode of Watchmen. Like always, if I'm talking about something you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you don't want to hear what I had to say about this week's episode of Batwoman, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Supergirl, The Walking Dead, and or this week's episode of Watchmen. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of Batwoman. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode. Let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we have the whole situation with Alice. She's going to morgues and she's slicing skin off of people, and it's like, okay, what the hell is that all about? And apparently this has been happening more and more. Obviously, Kate doesn't want to believe it's Alice because it's like, yeah, Alice is a little crazy, but she wouldn't go that depraved. And that's like, oh, turns out to super be her. So she's gathering up supplies and everything, and it's like, wait, Bruce doesn't have any night vision goggles, and it's like, Batman doesn't wear goggles or something like that, which I'm wondering, is that supposed to be, like, is that like an inside joke or something like that? Because I'm like, I mean, typically you don't see Batman wearing goggles, but, well, it might not be an inside joke. It might be the situation of, well, because we end up seeing later on that there's already, you know, night vision goggles already in part of the mask. But, you know, there are goggles that Batman has worn. So I don't know whether that's supposed to be a knock against that. Because I know even, like, the Ben Affleck Batman, like Batman v Superman, because there was an alternate future that he saw where Superman was kind of running things and in control and unstoppable. That, and I'm pretty sure he wears some in Justice League as well, but I don't remember. It's been a while. But I don't know. Like, maybe it was just more so than anything, like wearing night vision goggles. That's so in the past. We got that locked and loaded already in your suit and everything. Maybe that's what it was. Also, I do love that. That's one of the coolest thing about Batman, you know, just the bats in general. Because that's just, because, I mean, typically you see Batman do it, but I think all the bats do it in the sense of, like, Robin and everyone else. No, definitely Robin, because even, like, Dick does it in Titans in the first episode, kind of like this kind of somewhat stealthy takedown. I mean, his was a little more, like, wide open and out there, so, but still, it is kind of nice to see kind of the stealth in the darkness. It's kind of where the Bat family kind of reigns supreme. Like, you can't mess with them in the darkness. They kind of own it, so I just thought that was kind of pretty neat, where Kate just systematically took everybody down like it was nothing. But then she has Alice captured, but Alice is going to tell her story. And slowly but surely over the course of the episode, Alice does kind of explain, you know, what happened to her all those years ago. Some dude found her. And I kept wondering the entire episode, was like, why do I recognize that dude? What have I seen him in? He's Enzo from iZombie. I was like, oh my god, the CW connection. I just thought that was just kind of interesting. I was like, of course, you know. But basically, it's some random dude that found her and kind of took her. He's like, no. The police, your family, they're on their way. He has a little boy named Johnny who's got like a messed up face. It looks like it looks like his face was like kind of heavily damaged by some accident or something. But Beth quickly learns, like, whoa, something's up here. This isn't what it's supposed to, like, he's claiming that, you know, oh, he's looking after me, but then, you know, Beth tries to run, and he locks her up, and now we kind of get a little more insight, because obviously we saw before that she was walking somewhere, and she saw, like, a face in some water or whatever, and so it turns out he's making faces of skin for his, like, I don't know whether he's literally skinning people's faces and doing that, well, because it turns out there's people who are taking, there was, like, you know, because what I'm getting confused about is, like, there was missing skin in the past, but I'm wondering, is that connected to Johnny or is that connected to his dad? Regardless, I guess he took skin from other people and formed it into that face mask, or whether that was supposed to be a thing of, it's a thing of he literally took the skin off of someone's face, which is interesting timing that this storyline is happening now, because considering everything going down with, like, the whispers in The Walking Dead, it's actually kind of interesting, and it's super creepy. I feel like it kind of shows you, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, when you think about Batman's rogues gallery, I mean, this is also coming from someone who's not that familiar with the rest of the rogues gallery of the other superheroes in the DC universe. I feel like Batman kind of has fucked up, you know, very sadistic villains when you actually think about it in the grand scheme of things, like people like Calendar Man and the Riddler. You know, they got their, like, psychopathy to them, but it, like, they're the murderers in a very twisted way. You know, they're literally the people you'd see, like, horror movies based around, like Saw, their own, those Saw level type, to a certain extent. So it's interesting when you actually kind of think about it in the grand scheme of things. And that's just creepy, like the whole face thing. And it turns out that's why he took Beth. It's because like his son never really had any friends and never had that connection with the human world, with the world, because it's like, oh, my son has a scarred face, so people called him monster. So he took Beth because it's like, oh, now my son finally has someone about his own age that he can actually be friends with and everything. So it's like, you can just like, oh, in a twisted way, there's like, oh, it's like, oh, you want to do what's best for your son, but at the same time, it's like, obviously you're going about it the most twisted way, but he's also trying to make faces for his son to kind of like make him have some semblance of normalcy, which is interesting. So I'm just curious, like, who that is. I mean, because later on, the whole Alice and Johnny situation, because she refers to him as brother, which, once again, her name is Alice, and once again, this is just based on Gotham, but her brother in Gotham was Tetch, the Mad Hatter. And, obviously there's this whole Alice in Wonderland aesthetic they're going for. So I'm wondering, is Johnny supposed to represent the Mad Hatter in this? Is that who he's going to become? Or is he some other... Because part of me was thinking because he can mimic voices and stuff like that, in fact, as he wears other people's faces, I'm like, that's got to be some character from the comic books I'm not familiar with. Because at first I was like, Clayface? Could this be like the beginnings of Clayface or something? But I'm like, no, I doubt that. But it is interesting, the whole, like... Because it seems so specific, so I feel like that has to be character specific about, like, the fact is that he can mimic other people's voices, because it seems like that's something he just naturally has as an ability, which, it's really sad, because in the long run, it's like Beth was able to get to a phone all those years ago, call her dad for help, and, Jacob traced it, him and Kate went out there, GCPD didn't come with them because, after all those false leads, they didn't believe anything, so they had to check it out on their own. But obviously the dude had his son, had Johnny pretend to be Kate. It's like, oh, using her voice and everything, but how does he know what she sounds like? It's like, well, those were home videos that had been playing on the television, so he was able to come up with the perfect excuses, because Johnny didn't want to do it. He's like, I don't want to, and his dad was like, do it, so it's like, and it's sad in the long, because like Kate was so close to her, like they were a door separated them, and she touched it, and you can have like Beth was on the other side being like, please, I'm here, like I love you, like just know that I'm here, but Kate didn't, and because he had threatened, like, oh, if you let anyone know you're here, I'm going to kill whoever comes for you. That includes her dad and her sister, and so she didn't say anything, but it's like, come on, we're twins, tell me. But Kate didn't feel it. And it's so sad because, like, Alice holds such resentment for both of them. It's like, Jacob, you hold such resentment for him. He believed you were dead. But, in her mind, after everything she went through, I think it's that sad situation of just a, twisted situation she was in, because she was such a little girl at the time. Like, obviously that hate and resentment growing in you for literally 15 years of, like, you didn't look for me hard enough. You didn't care. But it's like they did, I mean, the twisted thing is, despite what Catherine did, she did it because neither one of your family was willing to give up on you. So she made them give up on you by making them think like, oh, you were gone, and that's, and because even her blaming Kate, being like, the fact is we're twins, that whole connection between us would be, I mean, it's like, I get it, but it's a thing of like, she was a kid herself. Like, the fact of the matter is she didn't know. But the thing is, it's like I said, it's just a thing that sadly Beth is in this so messed up situation. She needs someone to blame to kind of have this outlet for everything that went wrong. And it's like, it's not their fault. It was just shitty circumstances. It was other parts at play here. It was that dude preventing them from knowing that you were there. It was Catherine doing what she did for whatever her reasoning being. Like, she said it was just, so that they would move on and everything. But still, like, I mean, to go to such extremes, because I guess in her mind it's like, well, we haven't found her, so she's dead anyway, so why keep them going, draining themselves and pushing themselves for something that's a lost cause anyway? That might be, Catherine's, justification for it. But it's just sad to see that that's where Alice holds such resentment. And also shows, it makes you wonder, is there, how much of Beth is actually here? Because obviously, like, this is Beth, this isn't just Alice, this is Beth who's planning all this because she wants to get revenge against these people who did all this terrible, it's like, you failed me, you're my family, you're the people I love and care about, you're supposed to love and care about me, but you don't. I'm also wondering, is there some truth to that moment where she was holding the blade to her wrist and being like, all you ever care about is Kate, Is Kate okay? Is Kate's home? What about me? And it's like, maybe even growing up, she looks back on her life and be like, oh, all you ever cared about was Kate. Kate. What about me? But maybe that was also her playing it up. I kind of get the feeling, especially because the way after she stabs Jacob, she's kind of like, kind of snaps out of it. So it's almost kind of like, crocodile tears, So it's like, that's the thing of not knowing what's real and what's fake with Alice. Because I think, like I said, I think it's not just Alice is, I feel like, this strong persona she created. Like, obviously it came from her friendship with Johnny, which we'll get to soon enough. But I think she created this persona where she felt tough and strong and okay. And Beth probably represents that weakness inside of her. Is probably how she'll look at it. So maybe Beth is seeking all this revenge, but she's using Alice as the mask to get it done. Of like, I need to punish everyone, that failed me. Because it's interesting, because obviously even Dotson is kind of throwing it in Jacob's face of like, oh, you failed her. The fact of the matter is, I joined the Crows and stuff like that because I believe that you were trying to save the city, but you didn't do anything. You just made it even more divided because, only people that are really taken care of are the rich. So, and it's not like Alice really has... She'll probably try and justify it by being like, that's her message behind everything. But more so than anything, it's about getting revenge. But I think it's not just about against Jacob. It is about the system that is Gotham, where the rich come out and because I guess it makes sense in the long run, because who was Catherine? And Catherine was powerful and rich, and she was able to make it seem like Beth died, faked some evidence, and was able to kind of get away with it for 15 years. So I guess it does kind of show like how corrupt Gotham is, that people who are rich and powerful can kind of do whatever they want and kind of make people disappear in a sense. Because she literally made Beth disappear, made it seem like Beth had died, made her family move on instead of keep looking for her. And because of that, Beth became Alice, So, and that's something Catherine's got to, carry that burden of like, I'm the reason why this is all coming back. It's so interesting because I make comparisons to Arrow in the sense that I love, because I love that being an aspect of Arrow of like your past mistakes, Oliver's past mistakes always coming back to bite him in the ass. And, it seems like Catherine's came back in a large way that she never saw coming, and even showing to the point that she went as far as she did to try and cover it up in many, many different steps and at different points, so that just makes it even worse. So. But even to go as far as Alice did to be like, oh, killing Daddy right now would be too easy. So, and even going as far as stabbing her dad, because I think when in this situation, after everything, the almost borderline Stockholm syndrome that, it's not even really Stockholm syndrome because it wasn't her captor. She fell for it. It's like they're having, because the connection she didn't feel with Kate anymore, she felt with Johnny. So I guess that kind of made for her. I'm curious to find out whatever did happen to his dad. Did his dad just naturally die? Because there's still so much of that story we don't know. Because even Kate talks about it. Like, she got pieces of it, but that's still not everything, because that was like a couple, well, no, because it was like a couple weeks into it, because she was like weeks and weeks later, and that's when she was able to kind of get the nail out of the board and get out of the room. So, but then what about that other 15 years? Like, that's a lot of time of like, what did it all mean? Because it turns out Johnny was in Arkham Asylum, which apparently there was a breakout, and it's like, Mary's like, I feel like I would have heard if there was a breakout. And I love Luke's response of, well, apparently you didn't, which is interesting. And obviously, I think when it comes to Arkham Asylum, when there's as many breakouts of Arkham Asylum as there are, it's probably a thing of like, yeah, let's keep that hush-hush. Especially now, when you don't have Batman to deal with that, it's kind of like, yeah, let's not. We've already got one psychopath running around, Alice, and the last thing we need is people to panic about the fact that there are other psychopaths. It makes you wonder who else got out, or is Johnny the only one? Like I said, I think we're probably going to get like, like I said, I'm curious to see what the Rogues Gallery looks like. Whether, like, I mean, it's also neat to know, like, oh, how much of the Rogues Gallery is, existent in this, continuity when it comes to Batman. Because maybe there's certain enemies that Bruce, even in his time as Batman, he never made, because, different continuities roll different ways. A great example of that was, obviously, it's on the Marvel front, but the Spider-Man for PS4, like, that was 8 years into him being Spider-Man, but there's certain villains of his that hadn't been established at that point, whereas other major villains were, so it's kind of that same thing of like, yeah, maybe in this universe Riddler exists, but maybe Dr. Freeze doesn't exist. Yeah, that kind of example, so it's just something like that to kind of think about. But It's very sad circumstance. I'm curious to see what Kate and, you know, Jacob are going to do, because for one, it's like, because now Kate's at the point where she's like, maybe there's no one that can reach out to Alice anymore, to reach out to Beth, because the fact is I couldn't feel that connection then, and I definitely can't reach out to her now, and Dad definitely can't, because she holds so much resentment towards him for giving up, and me too, but I feel like she resents, well, because she resents them both heavily in this, but in different ways. It's like, you're my dad, you should have protected me, you should have never given up on me. You're my sister, you're my twin, you definitely shouldn't have given up on me. So the hate runs deep for both of them in different regards, yet similar regards, you know. So, but I'm also curious to see what happens to the whole Catherine situation, because now Mary knows, and Mary's handling that in her own way, kind of getting drunk, showing up there with Luke and everything. I love her looking at all that missing. It's like, oh, the fact of the matter is, I'm the good sister. Oh, she's all spending time with, you know, Alice. How many people have I killed? It's like, Luke's like, wait, what? And she's like, I'm gonna let you guess. It's 0. And between, why is it taking you so long to realize that it's 0 or something like that? And I thought it was kind of interesting, because, and I think it shows you, like, you know, for Mary, it's like, I guess she put in so much effort over the years of like being a sister for Kate. It's like, I'm not trying to replace Beth or anything, but it's like, you know, and I guess in Kate's eyes, it's almost like you were a replacement. You and your mom were a replacement for her mom and her sister that she lost. And now it turns into the thing of like, oh, now you'd rather spend time with her than me, which, to be fair, it's like Kate's trying to save her sister. It's like, it's not just like, oh, she's trying to choose her over you, but it's still like, that's my twin. There's that connection. But you see Mary kind of suffering from that of like, no, love me too. I'm your sister too. I care about you. I haven't killed anyone. I haven't stole skin from someone. And Luke's like, yeah. You haven't stolen skin from anybody. I got it. She's like, well, I haven't. But the fact of the matter is, seeing all the skin made her go like, is it disgusting that, or disturbing that this makes me want to order pizza? And he's like, yes, that is very disturbing or disgusting or something like that. So I love that they had a little bonding time, which I'm wondering, is that going to turn into something later on? It's just a little side plot in the episode, but I kind of get the feeling like that might turn into something more. So, I mean, now pretty much everyone, at least of the main characters, know the truth. Now, I doubt they're going to let everyone know this, but they can't really probably let the whole thing Catherine's secrets. They probably don't, Jacob and Kate probably don't want that to go public, because the moment that becomes public, then it turns into the whole thing of like everyone knowing the truth about Alice too, which could help them, but it could also be a detriment, because they'll just probably like get in the way of like, oh, the moment people find out that that's really bad, they'll probably try and keep Kate and Jacob as far away from this. You know, now Sophie also knows too, so I'm very interested to kind of learn, you know, more about this Alice and Johnny situation. Like, I mean, we saw the beginning steps of like, oh, I want to be your friend, I want to be there for you, and he gave her the Alice in Wonderland book. So I guess that kind of, you know, because obviously when you're in a traumatic situation, you need a place to escape, and I guess that book was their escape, you know, both from the craziness that was Johnny's dad. Like I said, I'm curious about that. Did they end up killing him? Because she kept referencing a mouse. Did she not? I guess she needed certain things that kind of, you know, she needed to make the public fuss that she has and kind of draw so many people's attention so that she could break him out, or at the very least probably get her rabbit gang to break him out of Arkham Asylum. So, but because obviously it's like, oh, why didn't you visit me? And she's like, well, if I had gone to visit you, they would have locked me up for being just as crazy as I am. But it's like, the fact of the matter is, once again, is about, you know, and she brings him a specific, because she cut a few people's body parts, but she brought him one specific piece of flesh, which I'm like, why that specifically? Or is it supposed to be like, oh, this is part where, or maybe she's looking for specific pieces that kind of put together to make him a permanent face, one that it's like, oh, you never had the perfect face, you know, or something. I don't know, maybe she's looking for pieces that, rather than give him the full face match, trying to find pieces that match his face, you know, skin tone wise and just texture. I don't know, which is disgusting to think about skin tone and texture wise, like, you know, kind of putting it like that. But maybe she's trying to find something that more fits his face, so it's not a whole full mask estimate, but just kind of cover up half of what's there, you know. Which even I thought about it at the end of the episode with his face like that, kind of reminded me a little bit of the Phantom of the Opera. Obviously more fleshy than, you know, the actual Phantom of the Opera, you know, with the whole mask situation and it being a full mask instead of half of a mask, but regardless. Not really sure what to kind of make of this entire situation, but I'm very interested to see ultimately, you know, where all it takes us as we kind of unravel more and more about, you know, Johnny and Alice. And like I said, ultimately what everyone's going to do with this newfound information of, oh yeah, like learning, you know, because I'm sure we're probably going to dive deeper next episode looking into this dude, whoever he was, you know, Johnny's dad, trying to figure out who he is, more about why he was locked up in, well, it had to deal with the fact that he was stealing skin from people. So I guess he was kind of picking up what his dad had left him. It's like dad would make the faces for him. So I guess him, like every so often, he probably has to make new faces. I guess maybe it's kind of similar to a look, not necessarily the same thing, but you can make winking nods to it, like Hollow Man, of like having to make flesh for yourself. I don't know. Like I said, my brain is just probably most likely overthinking all this, but I'm still curious to see where it all ends up taking us going forward. And now moving on to this week's episode of Supergirl. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we had the continued investigation into Andrea and Obsidian. It was kind of interesting, like, obviously, you know, Kara bringing William into the fold to a certain extent, because obviously she's bringing the DEO and Alex into all of this, you know, because Alex is, you know, obviously Alex is looking at this from a perspective of like, oh yeah, I got to investigate because obviously this might be a giant criminal conspiracy. There's that. But then on top of all that, it's also, well, Kelly works for Obsidian and I'd rather be 100% sure because his job means so much to her, especially because Kelly's like, dude, because of all of this, like she's able to help people out on a much better scale, like of just how with Obsidian's technology and the lenses and stuff like that, how it can help people, you know, coping with therapy and stuff like that. It, you know, it's like, oh, there's such good thing to it. And so that's why stuff like that is why Alex is reluctant to be like, okay, we need to get all our ducks in a row, be 100% sure about this Andrea situation before we, you know, pull the plug on this whole thing. So it was kind of interesting, like, seeing that investigation stuff with William, too, because Kara has to go back to hiding, like, all right, I have to cover up how I do my investigations. Like, oh, I just got lucky and found all this stuff in Andrea's office. I love that she kind of have to go back. And she hasn't had to do it for a while. The last person she had to do that around was Nia, but now Nia was into the fold. So it's always that weird thing of, like, yeah, when people don't know your secrets, you kind of have to work around it a little bit. So I like that aspect of Supergirl, of, like, having to be, like, sly about using your powers and stuff like that. I guess technically the last person she had to do it around was Lena, I guess technically, if you want to get, you know, really specific about it. Regardless, it is interesting, you know, obviously seeing that, you know, Andrea is potentially tied to all these assassins, and obviously you know, they're pushing the lenses obviously a lot more. I think it's going in the direction of it being a much more public thing of like everyone having access to it. You know, obviously this is like Google Glass, but they're like the more like technologically advanced and crazy potential Google Glass, you know, to a certain extent. Obviously it's, like I said, on a whole other level, but that's the most real world comparison I can make. I guess you can be VR goggles, headsets and stuff like that would be another comparison. Regardless, I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but it was interesting finding out why this case meant so much to William, because we ended up finding out this all started because of his friend Russell, who he thinks was killed by one of the assassins, Rip Roar. And this whole interesting thing of like, because it's like no body was ever found and stuff like that. Because obviously Russell started off this whole situation looking into the Rios family a little bit anyway, just because it's like he felt like they probably had some skeletons, but he's like, Andrea is nothing like that, so I'm not worried about that. But the fact of the matter is, I got to find out what this family is like really up to and stuff like that. So, but he ended up disappearing, and so because of that, I think William took it upon himself to investigate, and that's why this is so important to him, why he's pushing so hard, because his best friend died because of it. And it's kind of interesting too, because obviously Russell kind of made a joke about like, well, I'm not going to introduce my best friend to Andrea yet because, you know, oh, you're smiling and everything. I'm going to make sure like we're married and everything before that ends up happening. But because of that, she doesn't know the connection between Russell and William. So because she probably didn't even, maybe he brought him up in name only, maybe. So she probably think, oh, maybe Russell's friend is some other, you probably wouldn't necessarily put it together. Or maybe she does know and she's just not letting on that she knows. She seems kind of ignorant to the subject. It seems like sincerity in the fact is that she doesn't know who William really is in that regard. So, but it's also interesting too to see like how William's passion for this case is kind of like trailing over to Kara as well, because there's moments throughout the episode where she gets super aggressive, because it is that thing that her and Alex kind of talk about of like, you feel it in your gut of like, I know what's really going on here, and you're kind of impatient, because for her it's like, I didn't do what I needed to do when I almost didn't make it when it came to stopping Lex last season, so I want to kind of jump ahead, but it's like, we got to make sure all our ducks are in a row before we really kind of do that, because you don't want to jump the gun, especially if this is as big as we think it is, And obviously Kara having to kind of pull William back too, because even Kara being like, the fact is when it came to the Lex Luthor thing, I had to pull myself back, remind myself I have to, because this is so big, because I do believe my gut that because of how important this is, I got to make sure all the I's are dotted and your T's are crossed type of situation, So I think that's kind of neat to show you that, no matter what the circumstances, it's like, I think that struggle that Kara's kind of going through of like, because it is reflective of William's struggle, but the whole thing of like, your mind as a reporter, obviously it's very personal to you because you want to get justice, you want to do what's right, but also you have to remember like, right, you have to do this the right way or all this could come crumbling down when the time comes. So you got to make sure, like, once again, I keep saying it, your ducks are in a row. So I just think that's just kind of an interesting little insight into like that, a little bit of an insight into like how the struggle between the reporter and the hero, at least when it comes to Kara, I just thought that was kind of fascinating. What I thought was really interesting too is the level of like super villain that was this episode. Cause I feel like, oh yeah, like usually there's villainy going down in National City. This was going to be like a worldwide event. So that's why I'm like, yo, this is some like super villain level stuff. So I thought that was kind of incredible. Obviously everything Rip Roar was doing, like basically going to send like in the Antarctic, like using a beam, which is interesting to know, like obviously like what that means even for a Kryptonian, that like something hotter than the center of the sun, well, is like thousands of times hotter than the center of the sun. I mean, to be fair, that's super hot. I don't want, I guess on some level, because it's not the same energy, but part of me was wondering, it's like, you would almost think that would boost a Kryptonian, but it's like, no, it's hotter, like heat-wise, it represents that, but that doesn't mean it's solar energy, It's not the same thing that, gives the Kryptonians their power on Earth from the yellow sun, so it's not the same thing, but it's just interesting to see how powerful it is and what it kind of did to, Kara. Well, it's also interesting too, and Brandon kind of talks about this. It almost seems like this is something that shouldn't exist right now. Like, he didn't, it sounded like from the conversation he was having explaining the weapon to Alex and Kara and John, it seemed like it was something that shouldn't exist yet. So it makes me think like at least, it's going to be known as this later on. But this, it almost seemed like he was kind of shocked, like, oh, this is actually kind of interesting that this is coming about now. Maybe it's kind of like in the history books, this is kind of where it started, but eventually it becomes something a little, because this was something that it kind of made, taking the marathon gun and putting another piece on top of it to make it into this powerful weapon. But regardless, I'm going on a tangent. I just thought it was a little interesting because I guess that kind of shows you, which we'll get to it soon enough, like the range and collectiveness that is Leviathan. But like I said, we'll get to that soon enough. But it was just interesting, like dealing with that. And like, I guess in my head, I knew he was fast, but I guess I never knew that he was like as fast as Kara. Well, I'm probably not as fast, but seeing John and Kara like swirl around to kind of close up, the cracking of like, was it like ice caps or whatever? So Kara and him like getting the water under control, kind of putting it back where it was, and then freezing the top of it was pretty. Cause I was about to say, I was like, how was John going to help? Because I was like, I know Kara has freeze breath, but it's like, oh, but just to kind of circumvent the water from like rushing up and building up too much more, that kind of helps subside the ripples that were shooting across the coast. And that was pretty badass of Nia being the one to kind of, I guess the way her powers work, it's almost like a frequency that it kind of like, well, it kind of dissipated it. I guess it hits I don't know. It was just kind of interesting. I guess it kind of works almost similar, like kind of like sound waves or something. Like I said, it hit it on a frequency or whatever that kind of disrupted it. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. So that's pretty badass. And it's like Nia kind of deserves a big clap, applause for that. It's like, yo, you literally almost single-handedly. Obviously it was a twofold strike from two different angles, but to hold her own in that regard was, I don't know, pretty badass. So there's that. But then we get the reveal, as I kind of figured it's like, yep. Rip Roar turns out to be William's friend. So it turns out, okay, so if that's the case, if that's Russell, then how did he become like that? Because it seemed like they technologically made him like that. Like, it's almost like he's under control and stuff like that. And I guess because William only thought Russell was dead because he couldn't find him, but also because Rip Roar said, oh, he's dead, which I guess it was to make it so that William would stop looking for him. And it's just like, oh, all that's left is Rip Roar, which begs the question, how did that happen so fast? Well, I guess because he was looking into the Liaisons, or, at the very least looking into something he shouldn't have been looking into. And they ended up finding him. It's like, well, rather than killing him, why don't we take this project of ours and kind of apply it to him and make him into, essentially one of our assassins. So I thought that was kind of interesting for it to kind of be set up like that. What's really interesting too is that basically this shows that this had nothing to do with Andrea. It's also kind of scary because most people didn't realize what was going on because they had the lenses on and everything like that. So I guess that's why the timing was meant to go with the launch of the lenses and stuff like that, was because they needed most people to be like not wary of it. So there wasn't, no one was seeing it coming. A few people who are, I don't know, it's just like a little thing of like, hey, Dreamer, that random lady at the pier was like, hey, Dreamer. And Nia's kind of having to, hi. I don't know. I like that. But I guess it's also just like a little thing to be like, hey, Nia's a recognizable hero. It's just like, oh my God, it's Dreamer walking around. Oh, that's so cool. What are you doing here? Type of thing. I don't know why. It's just, I latched onto it. I thought, I was like, oh, that's just kind of interesting. But it shows that like basically Obsidian's headquarters would have been in the, flood zone. So it's like, it wouldn't have benefited them to be in that position because they would have lost a shit ton of money. So it's like, so that begs it, because when we got the laser initially, I was like, is the twist going to be that Andrea isn't the one behind this, but she's the actual target? And it seems like that might be the case. It might have been kind of on purpose in a sense of it might have meant to be a sign, or maybe this is all some long con in some shape or form. We'll get to that soon enough. But then it does beg the question, like, well, then if this isn't Andrea behind all this, then who is? Well, we find out it's Leviathan. So it's like, okay. So my mind immediately goes to the thing of like, okay, so, because even Andrea was like, wait, that whole thing, that was y'all? That was Leviathan? And it's like, oh, which actually in the grand scheme of things, it kind of makes sense, Leviathan, water. This is just me pulling from it because, I'm familiar with Leviathan in a sense of, me being the Final Fantasy nerd that I am. So it kind of, because I'm pretty sure that's pulled from like some mythology of like Leviathan being like a giant water serpent, but once again, so it begs the question like, okay, so this whole thing with Russell, I think this is a major cover up that the Liaisons are connected to Leviathan. It might be like all their money came from this like secret organization group, or at the very least, maybe Andrea's parents are part of it and she reluctantly kind of got dragged into it because maybe it's kind of a bit of a legacy thing. So there might be some parallels between the Liaisons and the Luthors. Well, Lex was a part of this whole Leviathan thing because he was unintentionally part of it because Eve was meant to drag him in, because it's like, it seems like they're almost like a cabal level thing. Like the way they make it sound like it's like Leviathan is everywhere. I think it's kind of a similar thing to to make comparison to The Walking Dead, the whole Negan situation with the Saints of like, oh, we are Negan. So it's probably a thing of like, we are Leviathan, the Leviathan operator. So it seems Leviathan is one person, but I guess the way the group is designed, it's meant to be like Leviathan is everywhere, has eyes everywhere, because we are Leviathan's eyes and ears. We are Leviathan, or maybe it's just simply we are Leviathan's eyes and ears. But regardless, I'm curious to see, because even the whole situation of the lady telling Andrea, it's like, oh, we have a Rip Roar problem, which does that mean she knows about Russell or not? So if that's the case, it's like part of me thinks, well, she's technologically savvy, so maybe she's the one that made Russell the way he is, or maybe she made the technology but doesn't know how it's being applied. So she's reluctantly working with this group. Maybe she doesn't know the ins and outs of what they're up to, or maybe she is a lot more deeper into this. But like I said, why would you make it so that Obsidian is in the way, potentially going to be caught up in, the flood as well? So it's like, not unless that was meant to be a message, or it's like, oh, the fact is we're punishing you because you didn't do what we asked you to do, or you kind of gotten a little too big for your britches type of situation. I don't know what to kind of make of that. So we'll kind of have to, dive into that soon enough. But obviously we'll be looking into this more, especially because Williams, he was so certain about things, and now it finds out his best friend is Rip Roar, and now it's like the investigation isn't what he thought it was, and now him and Kara have to look at this whole thing from a different angle of like, okay, so what does this really mean? So there's all of that. Then there's on top of that, there's a very interesting storyline that's kind of been set up in this episode. I think is kind of pretty neat, and that's Kelly confiding in Nia about the whole seeing Alex work. It's like, oh my god, it's one thing to know that she works in this environment and stuff like that, she fights bad guys and stuff like that, but to see it in that extent of holy crap, she could have died, it shifts things a little bit. And because I'd forgotten until she mentioned, it's like, right, her fiance died. She's like, my fiance died on the front lines, and she doesn't want to see the same thing happen with Alex. And I thought that I was like, oh, it's that complicated thing of obviously Alex kind of wanted to walk away from that whole situation of the DEO, because obviously she wanted to start a family and stuff like that. So it seems like we're kind of getting that parallel again. Obviously, I think it's a thing of Kelly being worried, but it's that interesting thing where she's like, I have this dread. She doesn't really know how to explain it, but she has this feeling like something's going to go wrong. And so maybe it'll be a situation of her kind of being a little overprotective of Alex going forward, which is interesting because Alex is a very overprotective type, just because, Alex wears her heart on her sleeves, she's tough and all, but she is a big softie on the inside too. So, that's the beautiful contrast that is Alex. So I think that's going to be interesting to see where their story kind of goes, because I don't know if that's something Kelly's necessary. It's going to be interesting because they're both kind of keeping secrets from each other for their own reasons, because obviously Alex is trying to protect Kelly, but I mean, now it's like, well, Andrea might not be connected to all this, so why even worry her about all that? But obviously Kelly probably doesn't want to she doesn't want to, probably come off a little too pushy of I want you to be safe and everything, because it's like, I recognize you do good work and everything, but I care about you and I don't want you to die, so it's gonna be interesting to see where things kind of go on that front, so then there's everything with Malefic. And I thought was kind of interesting, the link. Well, for one, he's, I guess this is going to be his permanent form now, maybe. It's him as Phil Lamar, which I'm like, yo, Phil Lamar, who's done countless things. My mind always goes to Mad TV, because that's the thing, I guess, growing up, I knew him best for. But then I think it's also, it's weird, too, because I'm so used, because he's, you know him more so, I feel in the voice acting world, because obviously, the one that always comes to mind first is just, because it's always stuck with me since I, found out years and years ago that it was him, was, freaking Samurai Jack is the first voice, but he does so many different voices, so many cartoons, and that's why I was kind of sitting there wondering, I was he has to have done he has to have voiced some DC character at some point in time, whether it was a video game or a cartoon, which I don't know if he does a lot of video game voice acting or not. Maybe he does. I mean, I would have to look through his filmography, and that's something I have to look out. I'm curious. You have to, you being someone who does voice acting work, you have to at some point. I'd actually be super surprised if he's never done something DC wise on some level, animated wise or video game wise. But like I said, definitely on the animated side. But regardless, I went on a bit of a tangent. But I thought it was interesting what they set up the whole Lena situation of okay, so basically he's making a condition of well, we're both kind of in an impasse, because it's you need me, and yeah, I kind of need you, but why should I really work with you? But it's hey, you help me get rid of the thing that's in my head that makes it so I can't kill my brother, and then you can study my brain all you want and everything. So I thought that was such a fascinating, and especially because Lena's I'm trying to stop it from people hurting each other, but he's but the fact of the matter is, I see your desperation. You're so desperate to kind of get this whole situation working so you can understand my brain, so you can help control people more. I see how desperate you are, so you're going to be willing to go down that line, which I'm that's so interesting. because Lena makes such a point about where she's willing to go for this extent. But I'm like, oh, so you're starting to compromise yourself a little bit, because sooner or later, going down the path that she's going, she is eventually going to lead to some compromise. So it is interesting seeing him kind of gain more control of all these different, species. And then eventually, it's like, okay, they studied and mapped out his brain and everything to kind of understand how he does what he does. And it's like, all right, the thing that makes it so I can't kill my brother has been wiped away. And Lena's like, oh, no, it hasn't. I was like, oh, and she double crossed him. He's like, and before he could really do anything, she activates the lenses and takes control of him, which that speaks volumes. That's his power. So even he isn't above it. But now Lena has everything she needs to make this come true, which I guess maybe she'll use Malefic as kind of a starting point to kind of, use him to be the focus point of kind of pushing his power to because once again, I brought that up too, like how great is his ability. At the very least, we saw it it seemed like he probably got control of those 3 different creatures at the same time, because I was wondering how much control can he have, what's the radius and stuff like that. Well, last episode, he had that whole place full of people under his control. So it shows that he can have multiple minds under his control. But the question then becomes well, what's the range and the radius? But I guess that really doesn't matter right now. But this could be definitely the first steps to Lena accomplishing what she wants. So what's that mean in the grand scheme of things? Also, potentially with this whole Leviathan thing, which, Leviathan's probably got an eye on everything that Lena's potentially up to, because it seems like they got an eye on everything Andrea's up to. So I'm curious to see where that all ends up going, because I think we're starting to get in that position where we are introducing, because they kind of went out, because it's like Malefic, I figured he wasn't going to be the main villain, but it seemed like the Leviathan stuff took it back. But it's like, nah, that's definitely starting to pick up now, because like I said, they literally performed some major super villain level stuff, especially because it seems, like I said, they are like a cabal of some sort that's trying to shift the world, trying to create world change. And I think there's going to be that thing of we might shift how entire countries and continents, how the world map is written or drawn, that type of catastrophic level type of thing of we cause this much destruction to kind of, there's other moving parts at play here that we're not aware of. So I'm very interested to kind of dive into all that and see ultimately where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. And now moving on to this week's episode of The Walking Dead. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's focus on what's up with Negan in this episode. That's kind of interesting. He ends up running into some dude named Brandon. Now, that was a really interesting turn of events, because it turns out Brandon's one of the kids that grew up in the sanctuary, because I guess he had his dad tell him all the great stories. Oh, Negan's this, Negan's great. And I guess it's interesting, because in the full scope of what this represents, I guess we'll kind of run through it, because the fact of the matter is he talks about all the glory that was in it. It's like, oh yeah, Rick came and screwed everything up, took us kids to Alexandria, killed our parents and stuff like that. It was war and everything, so there was death on both sides. But it's it's kind of interesting, because Negan's kind of seen as the boogeyman for every other community, but from the Savior's point of view, at Sanctuary, not even just the Savior's, but from the Sanctuary point of view, it's he's Rick was the boogeyman in the grand scheme of things, which is kind of interesting. And it was just interesting having Brandon go on and on about the greatness that was the Sanctuary and the Saviors. And then he brings up the fact that it's oh yeah, I heard about Carl. Yeah, I heard that you cut his hand off and you shot him or something, I guess is what it's kind of suggesting. Well, one, I think it's, obviously it's this fable of just oh yeah, Negan's so badass and this and that. I guess it's something that was told, people thought that, which Negan didn't appreciate, because it's almost basically shut your damn mouth. For one, I'd never kill a kid, but also he would never do that to Carl, because he respected Carl. He was that kid has potential, what he could have done in this world, which is interesting because, like I said, this is something I read years ago, because I'm not familiar with the comic book, but I remember something was basically being is Carl going to be the next Negan? They were referencing that in the comic books and stuff like that. I was reading something that was kind of suggesting it, and I thought just seeing that title, I was oh, that was interesting. But regardless, Negan saw a lot of potential in Carl, and, it's probably if he, had a kid, he would hope that, he would hope a kid he has would be like Carl. So I think maybe in some way he, maybe he even saw a little bit of himself in Carl, whatever the case may be. So I just think that's interesting, and which is interesting because I think, if I remember correctly, I remember hearing this, I don't know how true it is, but didn't Rick lose a hand in the comic book, if not both? I could have sworn he did. But, you know, maybe that's something they're kind of winking and nodding towards when they say that, or maybe not. I mean, I wonder about the whole shooting Carl too. Well, I'm wondering if that has something to do with his eye, because that's how he lost his eye, was like he got shot back in that season 6. So I'm curious if that what that dude was referencing, or just saying in general that's how Carl died, you know. But I would like Negan didn't like that, but it's like, all right, let's go on. I even love that whole thing of like, yeah, what do you think about her? She's a 7. I mean, didn't you guys used to do that all the time? He's like, yeah, and Negan's like, no, I don't remember us ever just sitting by and rating walkers, which is interesting, kind of in the Walking Dead scheme of things. There was in the 400 Days, I don't remember. It's the dude that Russell ends up meeting. This is the Telltale The Walking Dead game, if you're familiar with it. The dude who was with Russell kind of did that, where he was like, oh, what do you think? Like, he's trying to force Russell to kind of give their lady a rating or whatever. But that's kind of what my mind immediately went to when he made reference to that. I wonder, is there a character that does? You know, because it's always that thing of like, you wonder, are those supposed to be like winks and nods towards the comic book or something like that? But nevertheless, Negan was like, we never did that. And anyway, at best, she's a 3. I'm like, oh, that's super messed up. But there was a woman and her child that were in danger, and Negan showed up to save the day, which is like, especially that last walker. I mean, just kind of showing you just how brutal, you know, because like most people just go stab and deal with, but it's like first walker, well, that other walker, he ended up ripping its head off with like the barbed wire and everything. The other one, he ended up, well, he not only sliced off, decapitated, he also stomped its head in like a watermelon. And then the other one, he bashed it with the door, and the dude was like, that almost kind of being, he's such a fanboy of Negan. He'd be like, yeah, that's the Negan style. And Negan's looking at him, what the hell are you talking about, kid? So, but the fact of the matter is, I like that, because Brendan's kind of stuck in the old age. Because if this was Negan from season 9, hell yeah. This would be, you know, that Negan would get behind this. But this is Negan years down the road. People change and grow, especially, you know, being locked up. You know, it gave him a different perspective on things. He's not the same Negan that he was. The Negan that started the Saviors isn't this Negan anymore. That part of him is kind of dead, you know. And so Brandon's trying to reach out to that part of him, but for him it's like, that's not the case. Brandon's even suggesting, it's like, oh, why don't we, you know, kill this family? It's like, no, the Saviors were all about people being a resource. He's like, yeah, but not these two, you know. Which is kind of shitty, because you can make the argument probably saying like, at one point in time you could have been looked at that same way, so for you to look at other people like that, it's almost just like, because like I said, he's grown up with these distorted stories about what Negan represented and what he did, you know. I just think that's kind of fascinating. Like I said, it's just like these, like almost like Negan some folklore and hero. It's interesting because, you know, obviously there was a section of people who wanted to hold on to the Sanctuary. That's obviously been a thing before, but other people from the Sanctuary have acclimated a lot more than others have, you know. So I just think that's kind of interesting in the grand scheme of things. But regardless, Negan even bonding with the kid and everything, telling him, it's like, oh man, you'll never get to experience certain parts of the world, like video games and yada yada yada. I love that Negan takes time to teach the kid about nut tapping, and it's like, that's so interesting and so weird that you would teach some kid that. But I guess it's kind of like, you know, it's like, hey, these are the things, you know, you need someone in your life to teach you about. I just thought that was interesting. He's giving him a breakdown on nut tapping, like the wrist work and everything. It's like, go too high, you're going to hit dick. So you got to make sure you aim right, so you just hit the balls. It's just kind of like, bam. I just, that's, you know, which also just kind of makes you go, man, dudes, we're weird. We do the weirdest things, and we come up with the weirdest things for entertainment. It's funny to think about like that. But I had a feeling, I kept thinking the entire time, I'm like, Brendan's going to come back around and kill them, isn't he? And sadly, he does. And it's like, because it's like, see, you told me like dangerous times ahead. I get it. It was a test and everything. It's like, no, asshole. I was telling you to leave and get your creepy, pasty face away from me. But he didn't listen, and Negan got pissed. Negan picked up the rock and proceeded to bash his head in, which is, you know, obviously he didn't go as far as he normally would if he had Lucille, which I thought that was kind of interesting. I never thought we'd see that combination again, the jacket and Lucille. Now that was really interesting to me. I didn't think we'd ever see Lucille again. But for him, it's like, oh, I don't want to wear the jacket. It's like, because I'll be too recognizable. It's like, no, because that's who you were, not who you are anymore. But I guess in that moment, it's just kind of like, all right, I guess I can't play around anymore. I can't just be this new. It's like, to get shit done, I need to go back to being the old Negan. Maybe, I don't know. because after that situation, they're just kind of, and this was what I was kind of bringing up at the beginning, and this is how I took it, as a situation of the monsters that people become and the monsters they create. This persona he had as Negan of like, oh, we are Negan. He ingrained that so heavily into people, and that when the time came, he sees like, you know, it's almost a reflection, because Brandon represented the monster you created, monster you once were yourself, and, you know, came face to face with the man that you are now. So I just thought that was just an interesting parallel, your past versus who you are now. So it's like your past catching up to you. So for him, it's probably like almost like, I'm kind of basically the reason why that woman and her kid died, because he was going to try and take them as close to, like, you know, one of the communities, most likely like Alexandria. So he was like, I'll take them as close as possible so that it'd be okay. I even love that little thing about him talking about Lucille. It's like, yeah, talking about planes. It's just like, oh yeah, when you go up high and just the feel and everything, cars looking like toys, but they so gave you food that was basically like baby diarrhea or something like that. So I also love that he's unapologetically cussing around a kid. Like, I don't know, because part of me wonders if he'd be like, oh, I'm sorry about that. But it's like, nah, Negan's very unapologetic. I mean, we've come to know that already. But I just thought that was kind of neat. And what that means at the end for him, where he's just kind of like, all right, I guess Negan's just kind of like, all right, like, because he kind of has nowhere in the world. He can't go back to being who he was, but I think he's trying to, just because at least that's something familiar. It's at least something to hold on to. I think he's just hurt and just angry, and it's just kind of like, all right, I need to take my frustration out on people. So, little pig, let me in. He's like, you know, I'm just going to have to be the big bad wolf again, you know? So it's more so he's adopting that persona again rather than fully, you know, I think it's just, you know, having to confront your past like that, I think just, it did something to him, and he's just kind of on a, you know, kind of got a bit of a death wish. So it's kind of like, yeah, he walks into the Whisperer's territory and starts knocking down walkers, and then all of a sudden we see Beta there, and he's like, all right, let's do this. I'm like, whoa, where's this going to take us going forward? I doubt they're going to kill Negan. They're probably going to try and like either recruit him because he is as strong as he is, or I don't know, it's like, oh, you have no place with those communities anymore, you have a place with us maybe, or maybe he's going to play some other role for them. I don't know. I'm curious to see what that Negan storyline ends up being. So there's that. Then there's everything at Hilltop, which is really interesting because, well, for one, they set up the whole Ezekiel situation that obviously, like, it seems like, oh, he's getting a little sick, which I'm like, that's interesting, because, like, a lot of other people getting sick. We see Rosita's getting sick. We see Kelly getting sick. I was wondering if that had anything to do with the water, because I was like, oh, is the water getting polluted from the fact of, like, there's bodies there? But that seems like that's an unrelated thing, but maybe it's related but unrelated. We'll get to that soon enough. But, other than that, I was wondering if that's what that was about. But Ezekiel's situation is different. It's like, apparently he's got thyroid cancer. Is that what he said, thyroid cancer? Or was it something else? He has cancer, which is like, holy shit. Also, it was kind of sweet, that little thing of like, oh yeah, like, Sadiq picked it up. But it looked like it was something Henry had made for him. I'm assuming it's supposed to be kind of representative of Shiva. So it kind of has a twofold meaning of representing, you know, both Henry and Shiva, you know. But for him, it's like his family, like this form of cancer is treatable. It's one of the few cancers that has a high success rate of being fought. But the fact of the matter is that was in a normal society where you had medicine and chemo. Now it's kind of set in stone of like, yeah, not much you can do about it. But, you know, Sadiq is being like, we can at least, you know, treat it. And for him, it's a thing of, you know, we could talk about it. We should talk about it, because Sadiq ends up bringing up his situation, because for him, it's like everyone, you know, when he in Alexandria, he had to get away because it's like they all just look at me, because it's just kind of like the way people look at you is just kind of a reminder of, you know, everything. It just kind of makes it real again, and just kind of makes it stay in your mind, everything that went down at that, as he said, like at the barn, everything with like the people that Alpha and the Whisperers killed, you know. So it's that whole complicated feeling and situation. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. But I think for Sadiq, it's like we need to talk about this stuff, rather, you know, at the very least, might not be 100% able to do something about it, but at the very least we can talk about it and not kind of have to shoulder these burdens alone, you know, because that's what we're here for each other, you know. That's, you know, to be there for each other when each other is kind of going through something. So, and he's even sad, like Sadiq sets up the whole situation so that Carol and Ezekiel can talk, but he brought it up last episode. He doesn't know how to talk to Carol anymore because it's just like, I guess just because of everything that they've lost. And I think what she's going through and what he's going through is that thing of like, you're in so much pain, you don't really know, you can't find the words to say, because it feels like no matter what you say, it's not going to make the pain go away, it's not going to make anything better, you know. So I think rather than saying something, because sometimes saying something is better than saying nothing at all. In my own ways, I've kind of learned that lesson our way myself of like, you don't need to have the perfect thing to say. You know, you just have to say something, you know, I think, to kind of get things started. But I think he's scared, you know, and he doesn't want to burden her even more, because it's like, no, I don't want to be her issue. I don't want to be her problem. I don't want to end up her problem, you know, is what I'm trying to say. And it's just like, because of that, she's walking toward, I almost halfway expected it to be like the doc dude being like, nah, she's busy right now or something like that, but it's like Ezekiel heard her walking towards the radio, and he clicks it off because he got scared. So I'm wondering, are we going to see kind of the flip side of that next episode, because it seemed like we kind of flipped, that might not be something they really feel the need to, you know, elaborate more on that side of things, but I'm curious in the grand scheme of things. Sadiq might I'm curious, is Sadiq going to be the one to end up telling Carol, and he's like, well, I thought Ezekiel would have told, you guys never talked, you know. So we'll see whatever ends up happening because of that. But other interesting things that's happening is obviously the whole conversation about, what should we do about the Whispers? There's home dude, you know, the blacksmith dude, who's like, okay, we should be focusing on the conversation is, you know, because Yumiko's kind of running things a little bit now. And it's kind of like, okay, so what should we do? Should we be making weapons? It's like, no, we should be making, you know, focusing on housing for like the other people in the kingdom who are just kind of staying out in tents. But it's like, home dude is like, we should never forget what, I'm blanking on the dude who was dating Enid. I'm blanking on his name right now. He used to be a part of the Saviors himself. An example of people who've acclimated more to this whole situation. But regardless, it is a whole thing of like, he's like, yeah, I haven't forgotten, but especially because he did lose someone important to him too. I mean, much like the blacksmith dude too as well, because he lost his wife. But it's a thing of like, I'm never going to forget. And he's like, okay, and you shouldn't. But I think it's the whole thing of like, we shouldn't let our anger and our need for revenge kind of take away the fact that we should be helping, like putting our community first, and it's something, you know, Daryl had talked about last episode of like, we need to kind of fix our inner problems first, because if we keep letting these inner situations play out, the outside stuff is going to like be the least of our worries. It's going to make it easier for them to swoop in and take us out, which that's interesting, because like there's a whole Magna situation this episode. I'm like, she's kind of been an asshole last episode, kind of getting pissed at Yumiko, was like, don't tell me what to do type of thing. I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? It's like, and like I brought up earlier, it's like, I brought up last episode, the whole like, she's her lawyer and everything. It's like, what does that mean? And it's like, some supplies went missing, but Magna's not really paying too much attention. But then we find out, you know, Kelly's out in the woods. Her condition, it seems like it's getting worse, because it just seems like moments it goes completely away, and then at moments it seems like her hearing goes like away like 85%, where it's just everything's like super muffled, you know. I guess she went off on her own because she thought like, no, I can handle this, I'm good, I'm fine. But the thing is that like is there something going on, like it's like, you know, something cancerous, tumorish? You know, is it, you know, just her getting sick? Because like I said, we got that little bit of a thing of like, Rosita got sick too, caught a bit of a bug. But I'm like, is it more than that? You know, so I'm curious. Because this might be like small scale warfare. Because obviously this popped up at the beginning of the season that Kelly talked about. Like the first episode of the season where Kelly was talking about the fact that her hearing was kind of going away a little bit. So it's like, what that means, I don't know. I'm curious to see what that ends up kind of translating into, whether that becomes like, is it something treatable? Is it just like some like condition? Like what that is, you know? So Connie goes out with, Daryl, jeez. I do like the fact that they are bonding, and he's trying to make her feel better, so he tells stories about Merle, about like, he had to get into the water to save Merle, and Merle was saying like, oh, you stupid, go get the beer. So I just thought that was kind of neat. It's kind of a little laugh they had. You know, Yumiko shows up, and luckily they were able to find Kelly, but we end up finding out, like, oh, not only Magna, but also Kelly have been stealing supplies for a while now. And, you know, Magna's whole thing is like, oh, we don't trust you, which is like, wait, what? Like, really? That's some bullshit. We've been you know, all of this has been going on for a while now, and now all of a sudden it's like, oh, you don't what? That's coming out of left field. Like, I don't know, because at least, I mean, to be fair, Magna was kind of like that at the beginning, but it seemed like everything kind of cooled down. But I guess not. It seemed interesting to me, and it's almost like, wait, what the hell are you doing? You know, and I guess Kelly went along with it because Magna probably convinced her, like, oh, this is the right thing. So, because like I said, everyone else in the group is acclimated. Luke has, Connie definitely has, and Yumiko has, but then later on we kind of find out a little bit more about what's going on there. So it's more stuff between Yumiko and Magna, because Magna's always had a hard time trusting people. Like, I guess this has something to do with some stuff that went down a long time ago that Magna and Yumiko are the only ones that know about, because it's like, oh, you're my lawyer. So, but it was the thing of like, I looked at you as someone who was in jail for the wrong reasons or something like that. So it's like, the way it makes it sounds like she's like, my cousin was Lodo or something. So it seems like someone did something to her cousin and she exacted revenge. And it's like, no, I straight up killed him or whatever. And which Yumiko was like, wait, what? And it's just like, that look you give me. It's like, how many people have we killed, Yumiko? And you're giving me that look? Because I guess this was a circumstance that was before all this. Like, there's a justification, not that it's justified, but it's like the way of the world of like, you kill to survive. It's kill or be killed in this world. But maybe this is representing something that Magna did before shit went down, before, you know, things went south. Maybe that's what, especially because this has to deal with her being a lawyer. So I'm assuming so, but I just thought that was interesting. And Yumiko's kind of like, yeah, you're going to have to stay somewhere else. So I'm curious to see what ends up happening with that whole Magna situation, because I'm like, why are you just so... it seems like it's a deep-seated thing in her not wanting to trust people, because she's mad at the people in the world. And it's like, well, why? I even love Daryl kind of snapping at her. It's like, all you do is talk shit. You ain't good for nothing else. So I don't know, and it seemed like that statement hit her, because maybe that was something someone else had said to her before. So it's just probably hearing Daryl say that just reminds her. But it's like, yeah, I guess because she's one of those people that's kind of faltering and not believing in this whole community thing, and I'm wondering why. I guess because she's seen so many people come and go, and it's just kind of like, maybe she looks at all this as bullshit. It's only a matter of time before it all kind of ends up collapsing anyway. So there's that. So, and then there's also the whole situation with the Whisperers themselves. I guess kind of representing the fact is Alpha doesn't like people questioning her authority, because for her, so we do find out the whole tree thing was her. Even though Gamma was making it seem like the whole walkers attacking wasn't them, but maybe it is. Because it's just like little by little, the whole point is to wear them out. But the dude was suggesting like, hey, maybe we should send our whole wave. Which she was like, oh yeah, we kind of nick them a little bit at a time, because the human body is frail. All it takes, a couple like nicks here and there will kind of eventually build up and kind of break the body down. All you have to do is kind of be precise about the blows and stuff like that. I guess once again just showing like, hey, don't question my authority. I'm the alpha here. Got to put you in your place. And by put you in your place, I mean kill you. So there's that. And I think for Gamma, it kind of hits her a little differently, too, because it's representing the fact it's a reminder of just, like, what she did, basically, inadvertently, indirectly, but kind of directly, killing her own sister to protect Alpha, and just everything that represents, because obviously she was getting pissed. I guess, like, stacking up these bodies and blocking off the waters, it's blocking off their water supply, so it's little by, which is, you know, kind of going up against an enemy who's very strategic in this manner is actually really interesting. Someone who's kind of, you know, making these very precise blows against you in certain ways to kind of wear you down little by little. I'm curious to see what the continuation of that is. But, you know, Alpha brought up to Gamma this whole thing about wearing different masks, because you see Aaron is nearby and he sees what she's up to, and she ends up cutting her hand and he gives her bandages, but it's kind of like, oh, maybe you need to wear a different mask to kind of draw him in. So I'm guessing it's a situation of, you know, making it seem like, oh, you don't want to be a part of this, that you are, you know, want to kind of get away from all of this because of, like, you know, like Lydia. I think that's kind of what it is. It's also interesting because it's like there's the whole conversation of sacrifices, which I think didn't, I think Gamma made a reference to the fact is you've had to make a big sacrifice too. You had to kill your own daughter, which obviously Beta and her Alpha know that that's not the case. Like, because it seemed like that's what she was referencing. Like, oh, you've kind of had to make a sacrifice in your own, and it's like that's what I was thinking. But it's like, yeah, you had to sacrifice your sister, and it sucks, and it's eating away at you. But it's like Alpha had to make a sacrifice too, so I should be willing to. It's like Alpha didn't sacrifice shit. Her daughter's still out there. She kind of hopes that the communities actually look after her daughter. She kind of left her in Daryl's hands and everything, so it kind of shows. It's just interesting when you think about it. So I am really interested to see what they're setting up in that regard, especially with the whole potential Gamma and Aaron, what that might set up to be. I don't know what they kind of ultimately make of it at this point in time. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode. I'm curious to ultimately see where all this ends up leading us going forward into the next episode. And now moving on to this week's episode of Watchmen, a great episode. There's a shit ton of stuff that went down in this episode, so let's break it down. We get introduced to a new character, Blake, who's an FBI agent who takes down vigilantes. You actually kind of feel bad for like that Mr. Shadow. Well, I think I was looking at the credits. His name was Mr. Shadow. I felt really bad for him because like the FBI set him up hard. And it's kind of sad because, and it's an interesting parallel that we get to see in this world of just kind of like the crowd of people outside be like, come on, he's a hero. Why are you locking him up? Which obviously Blake is like, he's not a hero. He's a fucking joke. And so it's just interesting to see that, that different, the thing of like the government's literally setting up vigilantes to arrest them. Almost seems like entrapment to an extent, but I guess not. But that's just interesting because it's a full-blown task force in itself, anti-vigilante. Once again, it's so interesting because that's something, because that comes up every once in a while about like, oh yeah, like maybe cops and vigilantes don't work together, but like they're being a full-blown task force. I mean, granted, it makes sense in this world because there's an anti-vigilante law, so of course it makes sense. But it's just interesting to think about it and to see it in such a modern time and take like that. It's like I said, an entire task force dedicated to that. But really, I had to look into it because I was like, wait a minute. Because I was trying to figure out who, which is interesting. Obviously, casting news. It's Jean Smart, which is like, it's so interesting because it's like, now because if you're unaware, prior to this, she was on Legion, which Marvel, and now it's like, oh, she's playing Lori Blake in this and a DC property. So it's just interesting when you see a crossover like that, I think. But what was interesting was like, wait, I was like, because I heard the last name of Blake. I was like, wait, you don't think? And so I ended up looking into it. It's like, because I didn't remember his last name, but the comedian's last name was Blake, which is interesting because like, well, yeah, could we end up finding out pretty early? It's like, holy crap, that's Lori, Silk Spectre to Lori. And it's like, holy crap. And it's like to know, also it's interesting that she uses her dad's last name. I mean, I guess it makes sense because if she did use her real last name, there would probably be too much like connection there where people would be like, oh, aren't you? So she probably distanced herself a little bit by using her dad's name, which is kind of interesting. In a grand scheme of things, but I guess it maybe in a weird way it kind of makes sense, just because her mom did have such an affinity for him. I mean, that is your dad after all, so why not kind of take his name if you're trying to hide who you really are? But that's also the kick in the teeth that you were once a vigilante who is now helping take down other vigilantes. And I was like, man, that's so interesting to see, how that all kind of rolls out like that. But basically, there's also this interesting thing where, what's that dude, Senator Keene shows up to her place and he's like basically talking about the Tulsa thing, which we do kind of get more scope of like, cause I was wondering how this whole like cops dressing up like vigilantes thing went about. It seems like that is specifically a Tulsa thing, but he's planning on like things are going good there. So eventually we're going to hit major cities like Atlanta, even Denver and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, so they're going to spread this out to be a much bigger thing, but Tulsa is kind of the epicenter for all of this. So I was like, that's really interesting to learn that details. But then he makes note of like, yeah, you kind of, when as president, because for him, it's like, he wants this whole situation in Tulsa dealt with, like to make it clean up because it's like he's got his name all over this whole like, cops being able to hide their identity, kind of basically playing heroes themselves. So it turns into this whole thing of like, if that's the case, like he's trying to aim for the presidency. So it's like he can't have anything kind of besmirching anything that's got his name all over. So he's sending Lori there to kind of, check things out, kind of get everything settled. Cause obviously like Judd's murder, it's kind of, it needs to be solved and kind of tidied up so it doesn't affect his presidency. And then he makes a remark of like, as president, I will have power to even get your owl out of prison. Which I was like, okay. So that must mean at some point in time, Dan got arrested. He must have never given up the vigilante stuff. I wonder who gave it up first. Was it Lori or was it Dan? I mean, well, to be fair, we know, once again, my information being based on the movie, they both gave it up, but then they kind of jumped back into it because, they missed it and they loved it. So to see that she's kind of pulled away from it now again like that, I wonder, did it take Dan getting arrested to do that? Maybe they backed away after everything within the context of like the Watchmen story, whether it be the movie or the comic book. But Dan felt the itch. Maybe he had to compensate for everything that was related to Ozymandias or what he did. Maybe it's like we were complicit in that, so we have to do our part to kind of make up for, that in some shape or form. Like, we'll never completely tip the scales in our favor, but we need to. So maybe that's what he was trying to do. I don't know. And maybe, Lori just didn't see things that way, or I don't know, or maybe it was something Dan did behind her back and he ended up getting arrested for it. But I'm wondering, like, that seems like that's kind of a bit of her motivation. Maybe, I don't know, because we don't know how long Dan's been arrested. It could be like pretty soon after the events of Watchmen, many years later. I don't know. I mean, it makes you wonder where everything stood between them because, like, well, at this point in time, we just got introduced to her. We'll see whether or not there's more to it later on, but it doesn't seem like she has kids. But, excuse me, I love that whole thing of, what's this dude's name? Petey? Which that actor looks so familiar. I have to look up, like, who he is because he looks so familiar. I just don't remember where. But Petey is talking, like, he was doing the slideshow and there's stuff about Rorschach. And the guy's like, what the hell is this? He's like, well, these guys are pulling, from Rorschach's journal. So I thought to get into psychology. It's like, is this 80 something? No, it's not. So who gives a damn about Rorschach? So I was like, I don't know whether that was supposed to be kind of like it's kind of sad considering like everything, I don't know. I just thought it was kind of interesting. And maybe that will circle back into being much more important thing, which I love Petey's representation in this story of like him and Lori, because obviously he's talking about all this stuff. Like for one, he drops some info that like, Lady Truth, she's the one who bought, Adrian, aka Ozymandias's, company. And apparently he's dead, but he's like, oh, there's reports that he had plastic surgery. I'm like, okay. So I was like, that's okay. So that's us kind of filling in that, yeah, there's a good chance it's Jeremy Irons. And they literally straight up go, nah, fuck it. We're just straight up confirming he totally is Ozymandias. So I thought that was just kind of interesting. But that in itself kind of like set some tones of like, okay, shows you like this company's power and range to the fact that they bought out Adrian's company and stuff like that. I wonder why did he kind of fake his death, or at the very least let people think that he's dead, Because once again, the world is still ignorant to what he did, right? The whole squid thing, I'm pretty sure, but maybe that's not the case at all. I don't know. But regardless, what I also like in this episode too is she's telling that joke. First, she's talking about like the dude who's laying bricks and stuff like that, make a fireplace. There's an extra brick. The girl throws it up in the air. Okay. And it's like, no, forget that joke. And then she starts down about the 3 heroes, each one going to hell. First, basically running down the list of Night Owl of like, oh, what did you do with the talents? I made this weapon, obviously representing, what was it? Archie, Night Owl's creation. That thing, and obviously, wait, did you kill people? No, it's like, oh, sorry, your heart's in the right place, but you're too soft. I guess it's a sense of like, yeah, you didn't kill anybody with it, but the fact of the matter is you have good intentions, but the fact is you're not willing to go all the way kind of shows that you're not ready for this. So sends him to hell. Then next up is Ozymandias. Obviously, it's like, oh, smart. Oh, what did I do? I dropped the squid on New York. How many people you killed? Like 3 million. And it's like, it's like God is like, Jesus, you're a monster. And he's like, no, I'm not, but get sent to hell. Next one, Dr. Manhattan. He already knows where his fate's going to take him because I'm already in hell. So I guess it's the thing of like, because he can already see it, either because he is in, I thought that was kind of interesting because like, that line I was thinking like, well, one way I was just thinking of was like, maybe it's a representation of like, I'm already there because of the way I can see the future and stuff like that. Or, like what I meant is that his mind is already there because like, oh, I know that's where I'm going to end up. So I'm already there. Or but you could take that and kind of apply it more so to the fact is of like, I'm already in hell being what I am. The fact is I am as powerful as I am. I'm the only person like me. So, distances me from anything that I once was as a human, distances me from everyone who is around me, who is human, kind of puts me on a different level, and the knowledge of seeing the future, already puts me in hell, kind of being, isolated, not having any connections to anything, not wanting any connections to anything. And then the whole thing about like, oh, who are you? Oh, I'm the little girl that threw the brick. My mind immediately goes to a joke that Bernie Burns from Rooster Teeth told on a RT podcast like a while back. I was like, holy crap. Like it's not the same thing, but it's similar because he told like a brick joke story like that. So it was a situation where I was like, okay, I just thought it was kind of interesting in that regard. And then it's like, oh, God gets hit by the brick, which is like, oh, that's interesting. And he ends up dying, which I guess showing, there's many different ways I guess you can interpret that, whether it's supposed to be like, oh, God isn't as all knowing or as all powerful, or, maybe even in the face of God, human. I don't know what to kind of make of that. Like, I have my thoughts, but I'm like, maybe that's a little too weird and out there to really say. To kind of about to say, like, even in the face of God, man spits in his face or something. Maybe that's one way you can interpret it. Once again, that could be me just pushing a line, but I don't know what to kind of make of that. But I guess it's kind of like, despite, it's like, I guess our real point is like, well, where does God go when he dies? Hell. I guess showing that, even as almighty as God is, the fact of the matter is hell is where everyone's going to end up. There's no like, almost, I guess, the cynical route of like, there's no happy ending for anything or anyone, despite what you do. Because even, I guess, like, it's supposed to represent the fact that you sent these heroes to hell because they did different things about trying to change the world and do this and that. But I guess it's like maybe all that's put God on the path to go in hell. Once again, this is me just throwing out conjecture. I wasn't really sure what to kind of, make of that. Some other interesting information I should drop in this episode too. I think it's kind of interesting. I didn't realize this, but the actor who plays Angela's husband, that actor's name is Yaha. I didn't know it until I saw his name. That's the actor who plays Black Mantis and Aquaman. So there's a DC connection there. Another DC connection is she's only in the episode for a little bit, but we see she might have popped up in a previous episode, and I just didn't realize it was her until this episode. I was like, isn't that Jessica Camacho? And it totally is, which she played Cynthia, aka Gypsy, in the Flash TV show back in season 4. So I just thought, well, I think she popped up in season 3 as well. I think so, 3 and 4. But she was a bigger part in 4. Regardless, that was just something I was just like, holy crap, that's so interesting. In the grand scheme of things, I was like, oh, DC connections. It's nuts. But nevertheless, it is, but, I meant to circle back to it about that conversation between Lori and Petey, because Petey kind of, he's like, I kind of know who you are, which she's like, what do you want? Do you want me to sign something? Which he was basically like, don't look down on me as like just some fanboy. I, had a PhD in history, so I know about the fact of the matter is you're a vigilante and you're literally connected to one of the most powerful beings in existence, Dr. Manhattan. So it's like, don't look at this as like, oh, me fanboying or something like that. It's like, I'm a history buff. And the fact is that's such a historical thing. Also, your role you played in history, being a vigilante and everything. And obviously the way the world is now being anti-vigilante, like obviously like it hits certain, markers, in the points of like history you should pay attention to, so that was kind of where he more so came from at it. So it's like, oh, I thought that was kind of interesting. And then there's a whole conversation about Ozymandias, and it's like, she's like, yeah, when it comes to Adrian, yeah, I knew him, but I'm not a big fan of him either. So there's that. She shows up in town and everything. In Tulsa, and that was kind of interesting, her talking with the cops and everything. I love her showing up, and it's like, Red Scare, and then obviously Jessica Camacho's character, I think her name was like Pirate Jenny, I think is what it was saying in the credits. And the fact of the matter is, and she's asking the guys like, oh, are your civil rights being violated? He's like, yeah, these people, he's like, actually, I was just kidding. I really don't give a shit. Let's go inside. And, she talks to Looking Glass. And there was that whole conversation I thought was kind of interesting of her being like, oh, is this basically a racist detector? He's like, you're oversimplifying it. And she refers to it as a racist detector again. And I love that she she's actually really, really good at her job, because she's actually piecing things apart. It's like, oh, how'd you find the information? Oh, did that information you get from that suspect come from you using the racist detector? Oh, how? Oh, basically, like, oh, Angela, she was in the room with him. Did she beat him to a pulp? It's like, I cannot confirm or deny something like that. It's, okay, so I thought that was interesting. She shows up at the funeral. She has a gun packed away, and she's not, like, obviously they have to hand over the weapons, but she had one hidden. And that whole conversation, her first conversation with Angela, has my favorite line. I tripped on it so much because I loved it from the trailer. Can you tell me what's the difference between a masked cop and a vigilante? And Angela's like, I don't know. And Laurie's like, I can't tell the difference either. And it's like, showing that the fact of the matter is how, and it's even something Keen was kind of saying, like, oh, maybe like that's why the 7th Cavalry is the way they are, because, it's like, well, people who like to wear masks, or maybe even suggesting, vigilantes aren't too happy about the whole aspect of cops. They already have problems with cops because cops get in their way when they're trying to, dish out justice. But at the same time, it's a whole thing of like envy that the fact is like, oh, I get in trouble for being a masked person, but oh, cops get away with it. So I just think that's kind of interesting in the long run. It's so interesting because I do know that like Laurie's character is different in the comic book a little bit than how it is in the movie. And I think the same thing kind of applies to Ozymandias as well. I think there's certain elements that are similar, but at the same time different. You could make the argument this is just the fact it's because Laurie is older. Maybe she's grown a little jaded. Just like her whole attitude towards things. It's like, oh yeah, I think I got a C stuck in my teeth. It's like, well, people are going to use your mask. I mean, it is like a mirror, so it should be expected of people. She kind of comes off a bit like a dick, but it's just what I love so much is the fact is that she seems like such an asshole, but she's so on top of everything. Because it's like, I think that's to kind of make people unsuspect her, where it's just kind of like, oh, here's some big shot FBI person coming in the show. But it's like, nah, she's really good at what she does. So kind of feeling things out. Obviously, there's a cavalry person that comes. It's like, Keen, you're going to come with me. If my heart stops beating, this bomb's going to go off. And I was like, all right, where this is going to go? And then, Laurie ends up shooting him. And I love later on, she's like, I wasn't expecting that. Because usually it's some BS about like, oh, if my heart starts beating, the bomb's going to go off. Turns out in this particular case, it did. If it wasn't for fast action from Angela dragging his body into the grave and pushing Judd's casket on top of, which is kind of super messed up and morbid when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. But I guess it's like, well, he's already dead, so he can't get much deader than dead. So I guess that's one way to look at him. But the timing is interesting because you do have Laurie pointing out the fact of the matter is no autopsy was run, because I guess if there was an autopsy run, it would have to admit like, oh, the drugs that was in his system and everything. So it's like they're looking out for their own. So it's like, we'll keep this on a hush hush. But she's like, I mean, the strangulation and everything is obviously a sign of death, but it's like, obviously you guys have something to hide if you're not even willing to run an autopsy, because that's just normal practice, no matter what the circumstances are. Even if things are clear, like you still want to run an autopsy, and the body's now been disposed of, so we can't really do that. Which begs the question, which makes you wonder, you would assume he was actually in there, but maybe it wasn't actually Crawford's body that was in there. Maybe it was someone else's, maybe not. I might be overthinking it and be all conspiracy theory and stuff like that. But I do love the fact is, Laurie went into Judd's, when she was there at the house, it's like, oh, she investigated, like, oh, did you know he had a secret compartment? And she's like, what? He did? Kind of playing dumb and everything. She's even hiding the fact is, I'm like, oh yeah, like, because once again, showing you how good she is, Laurie noticed the tracks from a wheelchair and everything. So there's a whole, wheel connection. But what I also loved is her being like, yeah, it's like, oh, it's like my dad, when he was murdered, when he was killed, they found a secret compartment of his. I'm like, oh, that's super true. So it's like, she's like, so every so often I check. I mean, it doesn't always pan out, but sometimes it does. I'm like, I like how you tie that back in there. And it makes you wonder, is that true? Is that what kind of made you decide, I'm going to look into stuff? Because obviously, I don't know. I'm interested. And there's also part of me now that I'm sitting here thinking about it. It's like, well, her dad was the comedian. So it kind of makes sense for her to kind of almost have the bleak outlook that she does and kind of tell the twisted jokes that she's unlike. Like the way she's acting is kind of very similar to her dad. So I guess like as she got older, she kind of grew into her, almost adopted her dad's personality, or maybe there's a particular reason why she did that. I mean, just, I guess, including everything that's kind of going down, I guess, like I said, you'd be a little jaded after, everything that's going down, but I don't know. I just thought it was interesting. And it's like, oh, the fact of the matter is, you know, she's saying like, well, she's like, okay, it's because Angela was like, what did you find? And it's like, oh, I didn't find, you know, what do you think I found? It's like, what did you find first? Because she knows Angela found it, because it's like, oh, you don't seem like the fainting type. And the last person that was in that room was you. But the fact is, you know, Lori points out she didn't find anything, which makes me go, okay, so Angela must have cleared out the hood beforehand, not unless it was Judd's wife, but I'm sure she probably didn't know about that. We'll see. But I think Angela did that to kind of cover for Judd, because he had been such an important person and what he represented. You know, he basically, if it comes out that like, oh, he was, you know, a white supremacist, or at the very least, he was part of the Klan at one point in time, which is now basically the 7th Cavalry, then I don't know. You know, I think it is a thing of like, he's been a good friend and person of mine. So maybe he did leave some stuff saying like, oh, clear some shit for me and stuff like that. Cause it's like, oh, if either one of us died, we'll read these specific things or do these specific things at the other's, you know, memorial. But I'm wondering, did she kind of just do that on her own? Was that, you know, cause that's not something she found out until after he was dead. So I doubt he'd leave a note of being like, oh yeah, by the way, get rid of the Klan hood that I have in my secret compartment. You know, I'm sure that wouldn't sit well with her, especially like you know, so that is something she did on her own, had to be. Now that I'm kind of, you know, talking myself through it. So it's just an interesting, very, very interesting development that she covered that up. I mean, it's further proof of like, oh, you're covering some stuff up. And that basically, you know, she's going to be sticking around, and basically that, you know, Laura's going to unravel all the secrets they're hiding, and the fact of the matter is kind of being like, oh, I know who you really are and stuff like that. And then Angela does something where she's like, ooh, I didn't know how to, like, I feel like you could interpret that 2 different ways. The main way is kind of showing you how much of a badass Angela is. I kind of laughed because of her being like, oh, I'm so scared. Oh, you know, I don't give a shit. It's like that look, and I was like, oh shit, I like that. And then she pours out the coffee in the pit and everything and walks away. I'm like, yo, that's super dope of Angela. That was pretty badass. But there was another part of me that was almost being like, you don't think that was supposed to be kind of a wink and a nod to the fact that she know? Because I interpreted her ooh as almost like a hoot from an owl. I know I'm super reading too much into that. It probably wasn't, it was the first thing, but I feel like it could be seen as a second thing too. But like I said, I'm sure that's just me overthinking everything. But I just thought that was kind of interesting. Also, the bit that I love that was crazy is the fact is, what was it? She has a suitcase. It's a giant blue dildo. Not just a regular giant blue dildo. It's a giant blue dildo with balls. I didn't know that was a thing. To be fair, I've never curated dildo, so I don't know what's out there. So I just thought that was interesting. And the case said Silk Spectre, what was it, in Manhattan or something? I forgot what it was it said. I was like, is that a porn parody? I was like, that's so good. And then basically she goes over to Petey's room, and it's like they shack up. Which is interesting because Petey had on like the little, cause he had, you know, taken, it wasn't like a, God, what do you call those? The little mask that she had to kind of cover her eyes, you know, when you sleep. A night mask? I'm blanking on the actual word for it, but he has one, but it was like the eyes were cut out because he's like, well, we're in Tulsa, so, you know, the police wear a mask, so while you're in Rome, you know, but the fact that he was wearing it makes me think like, because it wouldn't serve as one, so I'm like, were they into a little role play too in that? And I was like, I guess it kind of makes sense in the grand scheme of things. But I was like, huh, that was fascinating. So there's that. Now, another side of this, you know, conspiracy hat on and everything, I believe Keen is connected to the 7th Cavalry. Either that, like, all this stuff that's orchestrated, because it's like, yeah, they went away for 3 years and now they're coming back. What for? I think it's a situation where he's trying to make himself out to be a hero, because it's like, oh, you know, he needs a good adversary to make it stand up against, like, the group that he put through, because crime is down like 80% or whatever, right, in Tulsa, and they're rolling this out. But it's like, oh, he needs to create a bit bad, kind of similar to some like Ozymandias shit of like, well, that was to kind of keep everyone from warring, that maybe he's trying to start a war so that he can come out on top and look like the good guy. Because it's just interesting, because obviously the guy did that cavalry dude just happens to be there, and he wants Keen out of anybody. That's when I'm like, if they were really about taking down police and all that, like, why wouldn't you just blow them up while they were unsuspected? So it's like, it was meant to be a play. It wasn't meant to go down like that. He was probably meant to come out of this looking like the hero, which which he kind of does anyway. But it's like, oh, isn't there talk about Russia working on stuff? It's like, no, that's not my damn business. What I'm working on is taking down the 7th Cavalry and everything that they represent. But it's like, I'm sure he's trying to turn all this in his favor. So that's where my mindset is on. So I think we're going to kind of dive into that. It is interesting, too, because his name is Joe King. So I'm like, is that supposed to be a pun on Joe King? You know, like telling a joke, like joking. I could be wrong. Like, I know it's King, but it still works either way, but still. So that was interesting. And then there's the other side of things with Ozymandias, with Adrian, that basically he's running some tests. And home dude, the replacement Mr. Phillips, I mean, to be fair, this might have been the Mr. Phillips that we met that got, promoted last episode, or it might be a different Mr. Phillips, because who knows what could have happened to the previous Mr. Phillips in between episodes. But it seems like he's putting on the experiment, and the next thing we see, he's frozen. So I'm wondering, is he trying to get him in the outer space? Is he trying to find a way to leave Earth? Is that what the whole thing is? But I love that, and it's so crazy because I just wouldn't expect it from Jeremy Irons. I mean, to be fair, I haven't seen everything he's been in, so maybe this kind of has fit similar to other roles he's played, but it just doesn't seem like Jeremy Irons, and I think that's what's so dope about it. He's stomping on the dude's face and his arms and legs and just talking about fucker and motherfucker. It doesn't seem like Jeremy Irons, because he's such a distinguished gentleman that it just seems weird, and maybe that's probably the benefit of it, of just like, oh, I get to play this different type of character or something, But regardless of all of that, like I said, I'm curious what that experiment was about. I'm sure it was trying to get out of the atmosphere, and home dude froze because it wasn't thick enough insulation to keep him from freezing and dying from it. Or, we'll see. But then there's also this thing with like a game warden that's kind of keeping him in his place. And the fact of the matter is that he is kind of a prisoner in a sort. So it's okay, so it seemed like he was running away, but maybe someone captured him and is keeping him prisoner, because it's like, oh, if you don't go along with the terms of our agreement, you get to stay here. I don't tell people where you are and who you really are and everything. Maybe not. I don't know, because he did go through the trouble getting plastic surgery and everything. Did I mention that earlier? Because I remember home dude had mentioned that. I think I mentioned it earlier. So, regardless, I get so caught up in my own mind I forget what I say half the time. Sorry. So I was just like, okay, so what are you up to? He's writing a letter to the game warden and everything, and it's just kind of like, huh. And then there's a whole thing about like, oh yeah, I'm also glad you enjoyed the tomatoes or whatever. So that's interesting. I wonder, is he trying to break free? It's like, he's working on this whole bunch of stuff, because we see all these plans and stuff like that. We even see him kind of dressed up in a superhero costume and everything at the end, which I guess that's his more traditional outfit. Once again, this is pulled more from the comic books. So, because I don't think he had a suit and everything, but I don't think he ever had a mask in the movie. Yeah, in the movie he didn't have one. So I was like, this might be more in line with his costume from the comic book. But either way, it's very, very interesting what they've set up so far. Oh, I'm also leaving off the end part too, where it's like, Laurie's talking to, him. It's like, yeah, the world still thinks like you give a crap about them when in actuality you don't. The fact of the matter is you don't even have a sense of humor, so I don't even know why I'm wasting my time telling you these jokes. But it is almost funny in the end, and maybe that's kind of like the comedy behind it, is the fact is, as she's walking, we see Angela's van drop down, and it's like funny because I guess it's like, oh, because of the grand scheme of things, like I just happened to be here at the right time and almost got killed by that, but hey, I'm still alive. So maybe that's kind of the dark, twisted sense of humor in that. Like I said, it's a bit of like, the comedian coming out of her a little bit, I guess, in that regard. But it could also be seen as kind of like a sign pointing her in the right direction, because that is Angela's vehicle, which that's going to be another thing she throws in Angela's way, which also begs the question about this whole Will situation, because that was the whole thing of like, that she was getting to, because I knew I was forgetting something about the conversation between her and Angela, where she was basically referencing the fact is that people who are, people like that who are being hung up or good guys, and the people who are covering up stuff for those particular people think they're good guys too, but they're not, essentially. So it's a lot of interesting stuff. This episode took us, I feel like, big steps forward with kind of figuring out 100% of everything that's going on. But either way, I am very, very excited to see what the next episode has in store for us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.